President Cyril Ramaphosa announced his cabinet last night, 2 weeks after his inauguration. Our good party leader, Patricia De Lille, retains her portfolio as tourism minister in the 7th administration. To get reaction on that, we are joined by the party's Secretary-General Brett Herron. Brett, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if this is good news for the good party. If you were hoping to get more, what's the general response from the good party after hearing that cabinet announcement last night?
Good morning, Naledi. Look, we joined the GNU and signed the statement of intent with no expectation around getting a position. We didn't ask for any positions. We didn't negotiate around positions. We joined to contribute constructively to a new era in South Africa of power sharing and to lend our support to a stable and effective government in the 7th Parliament. And so the appointment of Patricia De Lille as the Minister of Tourism again was not something we asked for or negotiated for. It was the President using his prerogative. But it's maybe not an unexpected appointment. She has performed exceptionally well in that portfolio in the last 2 years. And the tourism sector certainly seemed to want her back in that sector, in that position.
Yeah, and of course we can talk about the road ahead for Minister De Lille now, who remains a Minister of Tourism. But let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on this very cabinet that we saw announced by the President. I mean, there's a lot that's been said about how, there were promises by the President at some point to trim down on the cabinet. In fact, what we've seen is an expanding of the cabinet. Your thoughts on that?
I think that is a disappointment because many of the parties who joined this, the Government of National Unity and signed the Statement of Intent themselves were campaigning for a reduced cabinet. The compromises that the President had to make in order to accommodate a Government of National Unity and certainly members of his own party and those of the larger parties like the Democratic Alliance have led to an expansion of the cabinet, and it appeared that when being invited to the table, many of those parties abandoned that demand that the cabinet be reduced and took portfolios that have now become split. For example, John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, has taken agriculture when it used to be when it was always previously joined with land reform. So there's a compromise, certainly not only from the President on his commitment, but by the parties who've joined this Government of National Unity. And if the President had taken a hard line, he could have still implemented a reduced cabinet and accommodated the governing parties or governing partners without having to expand the cabinet.
Yeah, and if we talk a little bit about some of those allocations, right, because you too, as a member of the Government of National Unity, I suppose had some sort of inkling of the sort of discussions that are taking place between some of the partners, right? What do you make of John Steenhuisen in the position of the Democratic Alliance, basic education, and even just some of your other members, for instance, Velenkosini Tlhabisa at COGTA, and PAC with land reform and rural development. I mean, do you think that he's matched the individuals and the leaders really well in the various departments that they're going to be running?
Well, I think that the most surprising thing for me is the Democratic Alliance selection of members to be ministers, to be frank. They're a much larger party. They have 89 members of parliament. And some of the appointments do not match their own mantra of fit for purpose. I mean, no disrespect to John, but I've never associated him with agriculture at all. I don't think I've heard him speak on agriculture. He doesn't come from an agricultural background. And so some of their choices are unusual, that John Steenhuisen would have chosen agriculture being the leader of the party. Dean McPherson in Public Works and Infrastructure, that also doesn't really make sense to me. And I would say that the Democratic Alliance had a greater number of members to choose from who may be more suitably qualified for their roles.
You know what I find quite interesting is, I suppose, when you look at even the positions that had been requested by some GNU members, like the Democratic Alliance, they'd asked for some sort of space in the presidency, whether it be deputy president or minister in the presidency, as part of their request. And in fact, the president holding on to Khumbudzo Ntshabeni as minister in the presidency, and the deputy minister there being Nongceba Mhlauli of the ANC, Kenneth Morolong of the ANC. And I think this says quite a bit about the power that you feel the president may very well have had in making these decisions, right? There's the argument that with the adding of coalition partners such as Good Party and the parties that subsequently joined GNU after yourselves, emboldened the president's decision-making. What do you make of that?
I tend to agree. I think that the outcome shows that the president drew a hard line ultimately in the sand, as we saw in that letter that was leaked. The opportunity for him to be able to do so was emboldened or strengthened by the fact that there were now 11 parties to the government of national unity, and that basically the ANC no longer needed the DA as much as they did at the beginning in order to get the president elected as president. So I think that the president demonstrated that ultimately the ANC is going to lead this government. And the DA demonstrated that they were eager to be partners in this government and were willing to compromise and back down on some of their demands. So I think we're in for interesting times as the tension between those two positions, with the DA wanting to be more involved in government and the president pushing back.
What do you make of, I suppose, what one could call the us and them that has now been, and you talk about a line being drawn in the sand. I see a very clear one with those that made it into the GNU, were able to secure some cabinet posts, and those that simply did not make it into the GNU and were not able to get cabinet posts. For instance, the EFF having said that they simply refused to be part of a government alongside a party like the Freedom Front Plus, and the Freedom Front Plus now being given correctional services to be led by now Minister Pieter Groenewald, right? Let's talk a little bit about what that divide you think will mean, where decision-making certainly is made and where the political trajectory of the country is as a party that is watching from inside the GNU.
Well, look, it's not helpful ever in trying to create coalition governments to make demands that parties must be excluded. We can differ on our policies and our values, but when you enter a government of national unity or coalition, what you really need to do is try and find agreement around a governing plan. And that's what brings parties together and holds them in the coalition or the government of national unity. So I think from the EFF's perspective, the demand that the Freedom Front Plus and the DA cannot be part of a government of national unity if they're going to be part of it was not helpful to them being included. And I think it would have been good for them to have been included. So that hard line that they took was not helpful, and it was not what many of us who went on study tours around how coalitions work in other parts of the world, and we were on them with the EFF. It was not what we learned as we were traveling around the world studying coalitions, that you can't have those positions that we won't work with another party. In some parts of the world, the extreme left-wing parties work with the extreme right-wing parties because they can agree on a basic governing plan.
Yeah.
So I think the statement of intent is a governing plan, and it's unfortunate that the EFF couldn't get behind it.
And of course, the Good Party is still having Patricia De Lille in that position of a tourism minister. And one of the, I think the standout points of her time as Minister of Tourism has been her work to really try and clean the space up, right? I mean, just in April of this year, her reporting that 35 million rand linked to irregular payments for services not rendered has been returned to the SA Tourism account. What is the priority now for the minister?
I think the minister started out by cleaning up and will always clean up wherever she is. That's the nature of her personality and her drive, is to make sure there's clean governance. But from what I understand, she will continue to advocate South Africa as a tourism destination, because tourism has one of the best sectors to contribute to job creation. So she'll be working on promoting South Africa as a tourism destination and promoting an inclusive tourism economy where those who've been excluded and those who live in poverty can find opportunity in the sector.